So I'm going to talk really about supporting seafarers in crisis and, as I said, to describe a little bit about the way that we've structured our approach to this particular issue. And in fact, having considered the title that was originally submitted, I decided it's actually the wrong title. The title really ought to be Supporting Seafarers and Their Families in Crisis. We easily can throw around the number 1.5, 1.6, plus probably number of seafarers, but immediately that means that we're talking about 10 million immediate family members and probably up to 100 million in an extended family. Families where that seafarer is the principal breadwinner, really the core of the whole family structure. And of course, if he's in a crisis situation, his family are in a crisis situation many, many times. And a little bit in reverse, if his family is in crisis, it creates a problem for the seafarer. So that interrelationship is something we should never forget, and certainly something that I think the charity world, the Maritime Seafarer Welfare charity world, has learnt rather strongly in the last few years. So, a blank screen. What are crises? For 200 years, the Sailor Society effectively has been handling various crises with seafarers. I think it started to take much more focus in terms of specific crises with the super typhoon Haiyan, or Yolanda as it's called in the Philippines, when many seafaring communities were directly affected by the typhoon. That had two effects. The effects on the seafarers were that they were they were hearing bits of news, but they had no communication, they were worried, and of course that becomes an emotional and many other struggles for them. And the communities themselves were really dramatically affected, and those traumas live today. And there was a recognition that the two needed to be linked, and we should have a response program that was clearly helping seafarers with communications, trying to give them some assurances and a communication link. And then on the shore side, on the land side, trying to provide support for those seafaring communities. And I must say in this aspect, Natalie was also very instrumental in developing a lot of the initial work. And I know that her heart and her organization, as with other organizations, were very supportive. So the work with Haiyan subsequently led to rebuilding of houses, re-establishing community centers, putting in medical facilities, and a lot of other activities which continue still today. This probably doesn't register quite as much. The Tull volcano, very close to a concentrated seafarer issue, with a lot of families currently still relocated to emergency services and facilities and looking for support. So it's an extension of our work to provide assistance in that area. Those are specifics. For many, many years, we've dealt with the very general aspects. Casualties in all forms, where the seafarer has needed support, groundings, collisions, or whatever, explosions, deaths at sea, and the like. Abandonment, as earlier mentioned this morning, still a very serious issue which leaves seafarers and their families in dire situations. Medical emergencies, I mentioned. Piracy is something that I think we've well recognized. We talked a little bit about it earlier. And of course, the Indian Ocean, Somalia piracy was a big headline. There was a lot of activity and a recognition again that hostage kidnapping created crises and a lot of reaction, a lot of response. To answer the question that was posed to the floor earlier about whether we put the right amount of attention to the security costs associated with Somali piracy, the answer was correctly given, I think, from my colleague on another chair who said every incident deserves expenditure, support for any crisis. And it's very regrettable that situations, particularly in West Africa, as was also highlighted in our earlier session, do not get the same attention. And it's perhaps regrettable that despite the well-meaning activities of many international organizations to put both political and other pressures on to finding solutions, effectively there's still a lot of too much impunity with respect to the acceptance of West African piracy. Kidnappings are there, deaths are there, hostage situations are there, and the same crisis that got a lot of headlines around Somalia get near minimal headlines today. And it's not just there, it is the other events, it is the robberies in South China Sea, it's the Singapore Straits, perhaps not quite such headline grabbing, but where many times it's the individual who suffers and the only headline is about the ship and the ship impact. And that software, hardware situation is regrettable. We've heard mention already today about the virus. And I think Martin gave some examples of the effect that it has for your organization. It has a lot of effect, of course, on the seafarers. And gradually, in the last few days, maybe the last week or so, the impact on seafarers and crews is getting headlines. It's fine to talk about ships not being able to be in port, perhaps the problems with the supply chains. That's valid. But the seafarer impacts are equally valid. And that's what we need to remember, we need to stress, and we need to take the opportunity to talk about. We need to recognize that there are simple things. Crew members that appear in a port, there's no ship. The ship's been diverted, there's a reason. And in several cases, those seafarers, not of course with the better manning agencies, but in some cases we have seafarers who have effectively been abandoned in port because there's no ship, cannot be repatriated, nobody to pay the costs. Sometimes they're quarantined. They can't even get home. And if they do get home, they might be quarantined again because they might have been in contact. And that's just the seafarers waiting to join the ships. The numbers that are waiting to off-sign where the ship is not coming into the port means the families don't get them back maybe for 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later. Those are effects. Some companies, of course, are doing really well. They're trying to rearrange the crew changeovers and the handovers. It's not easy in today's world. It's a complicated subject. Who suffers? Mostly the seafarer and their families. We have a case at the moment on the Diamond Princess. All the attention, number of crew passengers, this video headlines, picture headlines about this wasn't the cruise we planned, etc. How many stories are there about the 1,000 seafarers on board living in multi-berth cabins where, of course, the ability to transmit viruses are much increased, still going around serving the passengers correctly, yes, but who's handling the dirty food? Who's handling the dirty laundry? Who is getting the maximum interface with the rest of the crew, with the rest of the persons on board? It's the seafarer, every kind. And we have lots of contact, and I must admit the company's been very helpful because they've asked for our help as well. But we have our seafarers contacting us, asking for help. We're communicating with their families. We have their families asking for help. So this virus situation is pretty dramatic, and it's an immediate crisis. Had we spoken a few weeks ago, I'd have talked to you about the 10,000 thereabouts that we handle a year within the society. If I use today's statistics, and I just threw in the ones around the virus, it's almost 1,000 a week that we're dealing with in these numbers, and it's probably escalating. And for our own chaplains, we have an issue. In some areas, we've had to close our seafarer centres because of the understandable national or port restrictions. In some, we have to make our judgment, try and take a responsible judgment. Should we create a centre where we might be commingling seafarers, where some of the effects might be that the other seafarers are going to be quarantined later? How about our chaplains and our ship visitors? We might visit one ship, we might have been in a centre, we might go on another ship. Are we a potential transmitter? So lots of issues for us to manage around just the other side of it, which doesn't get the headlines, about the people issues associated with the virus in the maritime world. We have a virtual chaplaincy. That's very convenient because it means that if we can't do it physically, we can at least do a lot of it virtually. and it's changing situations, so you need to be on top of the facts. So seafarers experience lots and lots of different crises. We've structured a response network that is basically built around, as you see, awareness, well, the three elements, of course, before, during, and after. Pre-departure awareness and training. And then in terms of response capability, 24/7 helplines, other social media contact capability, and a response. A large number of trained counsellors, specifically trained counsellors to be able to help. And then on the specifics, chaplains and port, in the ports, of course, and also visiting families. And we have a whole group of family support officers as well. And then the ability to provide financial and other support in emergencies, both for families in particular emergencies, schooling, education, medicines, or whatever, and seafarers subsequently, if it's rehabilitation, retraining, if the crisis has been so traumatic that the ability to return to work is limited. I see the clock ticks, so very quickly, the last few little comments. In a crisis situation, we can talk about training, we can talk about everything else. Of course, a principal element is the ability to cope. If you can cope with a crisis, you're at least part way to be able to manage it. And so our Wellness at Sea program, which is built around the holistic approach to wellness, specifically the physical side, of course, the social side, the emotional side, and the intellectual side, meaning you have access to information and facts. And the clock's ticking. But being prepared, being able to cope is really critical. And to empower the individual by making things like our wellness app available, which is part of the training, part of the ability to update on information, is one element of our total crisis response network. So with the clock ticking and beating me, time's up indeed. The next one would have been my slide, which is Say the Society, which says, thank you.